live with your own failure. Where did that bring you? Back to me.
I do not love Avengers Endgame. I do, however, love Avengers Infinity War. Here's my explanation. Avengers Endgame starts off where Infinity War left off. We catch up with our main roster of heroes, and they are in a bind. The bind that they are in is that they are dealing with the repercussions of their failure. We see Robert Downey Jr., who plays Tony Stark, and Robert Downey Jr. is amazing in this movie. The performance that he gives within the first 5 minutes is Oscar caliber. We catch up with Tony, and he's playing games with Nebula, and it's cute. Then he gives a very heartfelt goodbye to Pepper Potts, and he drifts away. But then Captain Marvel shows up and saves the day. So then Captain Marvel brings Tony back to his friends, and we get a powerful scene where Tony Stark is completely distressed. Tony and Cap finally come face to face after the events of Civil War, and they are at odds with each other. Tony Stark breaks down mentally, and he officially retires. Then we have Captain Marvel, and she is cocky as always. She proclaims that she is going to be the one that kills Thanos. So in a very interesting sequence, the team discovers where Thanos is. They go to the planet that he's on. Captain Marvel goes in there to do some recon, and she comes back and says he's all alone. And then we see Thanos on his farm because he has a retirement plan. And then the team ambushes him, and they immediately cut off his hand, and they have a conversation with him, which was very intense because Thanos says that he destroyed the stones because if they had stuck around, they would have only been used for temptation. So at this very moment, it seems that all hope is lost. There's no way to undo what Thanos did. And it's very intense because we're wondering, well, this is the main bad guy, and we see him in this situation where he's outnumbered, he's weak, he can't really do anything, but he's still remaining cocky. And he has a conversation with Nebula, and Thor immediately cuts off his head, and it's a nice joke because what happened at the end of Infinity War.
You should have gone for the head.
Thor goes for the head, the striking blow, but it's all for nothing. It's just for, Thanos is dead. We can't undo what's already been done. So even though they took out the main bad guy, they didn't save the day. They failed. And to me, that was very astonishing because we've never seen the Avengers in this situation before. So then we skip ahead 5 years later, and we see where everyone is at. And the team is still holding it together. We have Captain America, who's given his speeches, and this was a fantastic scene where we have Captain America giving people some hope, where he gives a very powerful speech that affected me, where he's like, it's up to us. If this is our world, and we have to take care of it, and if we don't, then Thanos should have killed all of us. I thought that was very powerful. He didn't say it like that. I'm just kind of paraphrasing. But that was a good scene. And then we see Natasha Romanoff, who is played by Scarlett Johansson, and she gives a powerful performance in here. Because when we learn what happened to Clint at the very beginning of this movie, Clint loses his family, and War Machine, who was played by Don Cheadle, tells Natasha that, hey, ever since he lost his family, this guy's been rogue and he's just slaughtering people, and I might not want to meet him after seeing the scene of what he did in Mexico. And she's like, I need to find him. Can you find him for me, please? And then she starts crying, and then we see Captain America come in, and he's trying to heal her emotionally, and it's very, very good stuff. Then we have Ant-Man, Scott Lang, who is played by Paul Rudd, and he comes in here after the events of Ant-Man and the Wasp, where he got stuck in the quantum realm. He comes out thanks to a mouse, which I thought was kind of silly, but I mean, how else was he gonna come out? I mean, I thought it would have been a bit better if some kids had came in and started playing around with it, or like a bum had come in and started fiddling around with it. But a mouse, it's not that big of a deal. It's just a little nitpick. I thought it could have been done a little better. But we got to keep the story going. This is a 3-hour movie. So Scott Lang comes back from the quantum realm, and he doesn't know what's going on. He goes to this site that's a memorial for the vanished, and he's trying to find his daughter Cassie, but he finds his name. And then he goes to a house, and then he finds Cassie, who was a lot older, and they have a nice moment. They should have had a lot more moments in the movie, but he found his daughter. That was his goal, and he accomplished it. So then he goes to the Avengers facility, and he tells them all about quantum physics. And then they're like, we can do a time heist, and we need to have a person who's very smart to figure out how we are going to execute said time heist. So they go to the smartest person on the team, Tony Stark. But the reveal is that Tony Stark is settling down, and he has a daughter, which is what he visioned in Infinity War. And he's got a wife, Pepper Potts. He's got a family, and he's retired officially. He's settling down. And the team goes to him and asks for his help, but he rejects them because he doesn't want to lose what he has, even though everyone else has lost something, and he even lost something. But then he's also gained something, and he wants to keep that intact. So then Tony Stark says no, and then the team leaves, and they're like, okay, who is smarter than Tony Stark, or at least as smart as Tony Stark? So they go to Bruce Banner, who has finally been able to merge the Hulk with himself. And it's funny, and I like the evolution of the Hulk, because in the first Avengers, he's just some brooding man who has a slight bit of intelligence. Then we see him in Thor Ragnarok, and he's medium, percent of intelligence, where he's able to fend for himself without puny Banner. And now in Endgame, it all comes full circle, where Bruce Banner explains that I've been able to merge myself with the Hulk. Now I've got the best of both worlds, and he's a huge celebrity. And we have a funny scene where Hulk, Bruce Banner, who was played by Mark Ruffalo, takes a picture with some kids because they know who he is. And then Scott Lang gets jealous and wants some of that glory, and he's like, oh, I'm Ant-Man, you want to take a picture with me? And there's this very funny scene where the kids are like, no, we don't know who you are, we don't want to take a picture with you. And Scott Lang's like, oh, okay. And then Hulk is like, oh, take the picture. And then Ant-Man's like, no, I don't want to take a picture. And then he's like, just take the goddamn camera and stuff, because he's all in his feelings. And I thought that was a very funny moment. Then we move on, and they start working on this time machine, which at this point in the movie, I kind of fell out of it, because either this mumbo jumbo went over my head. There was a good moment out of it where Don Cheadle, who plays War Machine, was like, hey, why don't we just find baby Thanos, and we just, and he shows this motion of like strangling him. And it's very funny. It's like, yeah, why not? But he's like, it's Thanos. And Hulk is like, you can't do that. That's horrible. It's like, it's Thanos, though. So it has, some funny moments in here. And we move along with this mumble jumble, which I'm not really interested in it because I was more interested in the characters and their emotions and the situations that they were going through. I was more into that, and then once we got into like, the superhero stuff with the time heist stuff, I was into it because they were executing this plan and they're trying to figure out where they remember all of the stones being so that they can go back in time, grab each individual stone before Thanos gets them, bring the stones back into their reality, create a new gauntlet, use the stones to fix what Thanos did. So then, they go through all this and then they get their suits and then they execute this plan of who's going where. And then we go back in time and we have a highlight reel of past events in the Avengers movies in chronological order. We go back to the first Avengers in the Battle of New York and we see the epic shot again and the team shows up and then Tony Stark goes to get the scepter, but then shit goes wrong and Loki, instead of being captured in the original timeline, he ends up taking the Tesseract and escaping, which should affect the timeline, but it doesn't. It's just there and nothing happens. So that kind of bothered me because, as the saying goes with time travel, if you do something in the past that changes the course of history, then that will change the outcome in the current reality. And that's what the Ancient One says, who is played by Tilda Swinton. She returns here and she has the Time Stone because Bruce Banner, the Hulk, who's played by Mark Ruffalo, shows up and tries to take the Time Stone from her way before Doctor Strange came into the picture. And then she uses her mythical powers to take the soul of Bruce Banner out of his body, and he tries to explain to her that, hey, it's a dire situation, we need that stone. But then the Ancient One says, well, yeah, everything will be all good in your reality, but in our reality, we're defenseless, and then so we need that stone. But then he tries to reason with her, and she accepts, and she gives him the stone, saying, well, you better come back here with it so we can be protected. So the whole thing with Loki really confused me because they changed the course of history. Instead of him being captured, he escapes, which to me seems like that's going to bleed into the little TV show they're going to do with Loki. So it's like little hints of what's going to come next within the MCU within this movie during this whole highlight reel sequence, which I wasn't really into. So Loki escapes, and then we see Robert Redford, which is great. We see we see everybody. We see all the characters from all the movies. The one moment that I did like was when we go to the Guardians of the Galaxy movie, and we see the beginning of that with Star-Lord, and he's dancing and singing tunes to himself. And I love the first Guardians movie. And it's interesting because we see that moment again, but then it's flipped on its head because then he's, Star-Lord's dancing. Star-Lord, who's played by Chris Pratt, is dancing and singing, and then War Machine comes in and just bitch slaps him, and they take, I think it's the Reality Stone, and, they go about their business. But then another twist in here is where past Thanos sees what's going on because Nebula within the past timeline is connected to the future Nebula, and he sees in her memory files that the future Avengers are coming into the past to try to take the stones to course correct things in their future, and Thanos sees this, so he implements a plan to have the two nebulas switch out, which is what happens. Then we have a repeat of what happened in Infinity War, where Black Widow and Hawkeye, who's played by Jeremy Renner, and I skipped ahead really far. Like Scarlett Johansson finds Jeremy Renner and she convinces him to come back. And then we have Thor, who's played by Chris Hemsworth. He's now a fat guy, which is very funny. He's fallen really far from grace, but he's still mighty. And then we see Korg, which is great. And, at first he's like, I don't want to help you because, of what happened. But then they convince him because, hey, there's beer. So it was nice, but it ended a bit poorly because it was too easy to convince him. So at first I was feeling it, but then by the end of the sequence, I didn't care. So then now we're at Hawkeye and Black Widow at Vormir, where Gamora got killed in Infinity War. And so they're like, oh, you need to do the sacrifice. And then, they both fight over it. And I thought at first it was touching, but then I think it went a little too far. Like, I understand that, they're friends, they love each other, and they don't want either one to die. They want to be the ones to make the sacrifice to save the others. But then they continuously fight over it, and it goes a bit too far, because then Hawkeye, he jumps over the cliff, and then Black Widow jumps over the cliff after him, and he uses his arrow to, as a bungee to hang on to the side of the cliff, and he is using that as support, and then he's holding himself up along with Black Widow, and she's like, just let me go and all this stuff. And I didn't really feel that moment, because as just looking at it, it's just a repeat of what happened to Gamora in Infinity War. And so comparing this, because it's the same music and it's technically the same scene. Like I said, this whole little middle portion of the movie where they go back in time is just a highlight reel, which is like, hey, it's been 11 years of these Marvel movies. Here's all the highlights, and they had some good moments in there. But there was just some stuff in there where I was just like, okay, we've been there, done that. You're just repeating what we've already seen. But then some moments do have a nice twist, like the Star-Lord thing, and also the scene, like we saw in Winter Soldier, where Captain America goes in the elevator and he's like, there's a twist on that. Whereas in the comic book, it's revealed that Captain America was a part of Hydra, and in this they kind of play with that a little bit, where they need to get the stones, and I don't remember, like, the SHIELD agents who are secretly Hydra, they have some stone, I don't remember, but then they have a stone, Captain America needs to get it, and he's like, give me the stone, and at first they don't want to give it to him, but then he says, Hell Hydra, which is a good laugh. Then, he's like, oh, he knows that we're part of Hydra, and they give him the stone, and then he fights the first Avengers version of himself, which is good. And I thought there was a little funny moment in there where the first Avenger Captain America, the past version of Captain America, outdoes the present version of Captain America, and so he's choking him. And then to get out of the situation, the future Captain America says to the past Captain America, Bucky is alive. And then all of a sudden, the past Captain America is like, what? And then future Captain America punches past Captain America in the face, and there was a pause for a moment where I thought he was going to say something like, you know what? I am sensitive about Bucky, because he used his feelings towards Bucky as a device to defeat his past self. So he knows his weakness for Bucky. But instead of doing that, they crack some joke about Captain America's ass, which is funny. It's funny, but I like the fact that they use his feelings towards Bucky as a device to be like, yeah, man, you are really sensitive about Bucky. So yeah, we have all these moments which are nice. Some moments are nicer than others, but then as a whole, it just feels like a repeat of the events, stuff that's already happened. It's just a big highlight reel, celebrating these 11 years, which is great. But at the same time, I'm like, we've been there, done that. Let's break some new ground, which it does with the time travel, but it's like highlight reel, which is great, but I kind of don't care. So yeah, Black Widow kills herself in the same fashion as Gamora. We see all these nice moments. Loki disappears without an explanation of how that is going to affect the timeline. And so, shit goes wrong with the Loki thing because they don't have the Tesseract. So then Tony Stark's like, well, we can go back into the way, way past and try and get it because I know where it is. So then they go back, and we do have a nice moment where Tony Stark is talking to his father, Howard Stark, and he finally has that moment where he can confront his father, and it's nice. Robert Downey Jr.'s, I'm telling you, Robert Downey Jr.'s performance in this movie is Oscar caliber, because the way he behaves in front of his, movie father, he's acting like how Agent Coulson was towards Captain America in the first Avengers movie.
I gotta say, it's an honor to meet you. Officially. I sort of met you. I mean, I watched you while you were sleeping. I mean, I was present while you were unconscious from the ice. You know, it's just a huge honor to have you on board.
He's just like nervous, and he loses he forgets about the briefcase with the Tesseract in it because he's all like excited to see his dad, but he's nervous at the same time, and they have a little nice moment together. And I like what Howard Stark said, where he's like, if I do have a kid, I want it to be a girl. And then Tony Stark's like, why? And then Howard Stark's like, I don't want if I have a son, I don't want him to be like me. And it perfectly spells out who Tony Stark is, because he's just like his father, even though he never really knew his father as much as he wanted to. Because his father says that, something like, I put all my time into my work, and that doesn't give me enough time for the things that are most important to me, because I'm always thinking about the bigger picture and the fate of the world, and stuff like that. And that's how Tony Stark feels. So we know where he gets that from. So we have this little nice moment between Tony and his father, which is great. Loved it, especially from the performance from Robert Downey Jr. Sold it perfectly. It was nice. Then they go back to their present time, and then they learn that Natasha's dead, and I kind of don't care. It was a good sacrifice, but I'm like, it's just a repeat of what happened in Infinity War. So then, Thanos learns what's going on, and then, they create a gauntlet with one of Iron Man's gloves, and then they do, the Incredible Hulk does the snap, and then, everybody who was vanished comes back, but then Thanos also shows up out of the quantum realm, and he just rains fire on the facility, blowing it all up. And Ant-Man should have died because he was closest to the blast, but he didn't. So at first I was like, okay, they've course corrected time. But then Thanos shows up. It was a very exciting scene. It's very exhilarating because, they do the snap, and then Thanos shows up, and then he shoots the facility, and then, Ant-Man, Scott Lang's in front of the window, and it just blows up. An explosion happens right in front of him. And I'm thinking, oh shit, Ant-Man just died. But then he didn't. So I kind of, at first the scene had a lot of levity, because it's like, oh, this is a good moment, and then it's just a disaster. And you're thinking, oh, this building, it kind of reminded me of what happened in Winter Soldier, in this stupid scene where Captain America and Scarlett Johansson are talking to Zol's algorithm in this bunker, and then he's like giving all this information to them, and he's like, I was just stalling, and he sends a missile in their direction, and then the facility blows up, and the only thing that saves Captain America and Natasha Romanoff is falling into some hole, and he uses his shield. I thought that was dumb. They should have died, but it's a movie and you can't kill them. So I thought it was good at first with how it was executed, but then once we see how it pans out, it kind of disappointed me. Within Endgame, like, oh yeah, we reverse time, and then Ant-Man standing in front of the window, oh glory, we won, and then Thanos, boom, blows everything up, and then Ant-Man, is right in front of the explosion, but nobody dies. But they're in a dire situation. Thanos shows up, and he's being lazy, like he was in the beginning of this franchise, where he's just constantly sitting down and he's having other people do his bidding, until Infinity War came around, where he's like, okay, I'm tired of people betraying me, I'm tired of people failing me, I'm gonna do it myself. So it's good that they went back to that, where he's just like, hey, it was a funny moment where Nebula, the past version of Nebula, is like, okay, I thought it was funny where the past version of Nebula and Thanos show up, and Thanos tells Nebula, get me the stones, and she's like, what are you going to do? And he's like, I'm just gonna sit here. And it's like, that's what he was doing at the beginning of this franchise. So I thought that was funny. Shows his past self, how he didn't really want to do anything while other people do his bidding. So he's sitting there, and then the Avengers, they try and come together to save everybody, and then Tony Stark, Captain America, and Thor confront Thanos, and he gives a speech, which is good, where he's being cocky about, now, I realize instead of wiping out Half-Life, I need to just wipe it clean and create a new, kind of like God. So Thanos has a God complex, where he thinks he's the almighty savior, and then Captain America's like, yeah, you're gonna do that, but it's in blood, and then Thanos is like, well, they'll never know. So then they have this epic fight, And Captain America, he holds the hammer in his hand. He's worthy, which I've talked to a few people about that, and they say Captain America does that in the comic books, and they kind of hinted at him moving the hammer in Age of Ultron, and now it comes full circle where he actually gets to wield it. And I kind of didn't care. I was kind of confused because I thought within the movies, only Thor could hold the hammer, even though they say, oh yeah, you have to be worthy. But at the same time, I thought it was like a signature thing where it's like the hammer is specifically assigned to Thor himself. No one else can actually hold the damn thing. So I thought it was kind of like that with the hammer, but I guess it's not. It's just whoever's worthy, which to me kind of makes no sense. Whatever. But so we got a good fight scene between Captain America and Thanos, but then, after Captain America beats Thanos' ass, Thanos comes back, whoops his ass, army shows up, then the people who got dusted in Infinity War show up in a nice moment, and they all come back, and we have this epic fight. And then, Captain Marvel shows up to save the day, and I was worried for a moment that Captain Marvel was going to be like what Superman was in Justice League, where all of the heroes are getting their ass whooped, and it just takes one person to save the day and whoop the villain's ass, which I was afraid that's what Marvel was going to do. But they didn't, which I'm glad. Captain Marvel shows up, she's wrecking havoc, and then she grabs the gauntlet because Thanos wants it, and they're trying to keep it from him, and she shows up and takes it. And in this moment where we get all of the women in one shot, it was funny because Captain Marvel claims she's the best. At the beginning of this movie, she's like, I'm going to kill Thanos. She's all cocky. But then when she gets the gauntlet and we see all the women profile shot, I think Spider-Man says, well, how are you going to get through this army? And then I forgot her name, Okoye from the Dora Milaje says, she has help. And I kind of laughed at that because, she's Captain Marvel. She can, if she wanted to, she could take out all those people. She can fly, and they can't. So I kind of laughed at that because I was like, what? And I was like, she doesn't need anybody's help, really. So I kind of laughed at that moment. So they help her, and then, something happens. Captain Marvel loses the gauntlet. Then there's a fight between Thanos and Tony. But before that, Tony talks to Doctor Strange, and he's like, oh yeah, is this what you visioned as, our win? And then, Doctor Strange says, well, if I tell you, it won't happen. And then so we have our fight between Thanos and Tony, and we have a fake out where Thanos thinks he has the gauntlet, but Tony switched him out. And then Tony Stark, in his last effort to save the world, he declares that he is Iron Man. He snaps his fingers and he undoes everything that Thanos did, eliminating the evil. So when you get the ultimate sacrifice, then the movie goes along, and then we see Captain America, and he's supposed to deliver the stones back to their current timelines, and he does that, but then he decides to stay with Peggy and get his dance that was promised in the first Avenger. And then we see an old, elderly Captain America, and he hands the mantle on to Falcon, says, here, take the shield, in a nice moment. And then we get a little funeral with Tony Stark, and we see all the characters from all the movies, and that's it. And that's it. My verdict for this movie, it's good. It's a good movie, but I loved Infinity War. I loved Infinity War because it was unpredictable, where I feel like Endgame is predictable. And Infinity War, to me, had so many memorable moments between characters, so many quotable lines, so many moments that affected me emotionally, where it made me cry. And yeah, it does have a lot of action in it, so it delivers on the action front, but the story elements meant the most to me. Infinity War to me is a memorable movie. That's why my top two favorite comic book movies as of right now is The Dark Knight and Infinity War, because they're both executing the narrative on a level of emotion where they're reeling the audience in to these characters and who they are, their personalities, the way they think, the way they behave. And when Infinity War starts, it's a dire situation. The movie immediately begins with death and sacrifice. And that's what happens throughout the entire movie. They're all trying to save each other, but then they fail. And in Endgame, it's a continuation of that. I love the first hour or so of it, because we see the effects of what happened in Infinity War, and we get those character connections and those character moments, which makes the story rich because of that emotion. But then once it gets into time heist crap, I lose interest and I kind of don't care, other than the nice little twist moments we have where they kind of alter the movies that we already saw, where, instead of Loki being captured in the first Avengers, he escapes, which they don't have a conclusion to that because it feels like it's going to bleed into the TV show with Loki. And then we have the first Guardians where, Star-Lord is dancing and singing, but he gets bitch slapped by War Machine, which was funny. And then Thanos finds out what's going on, so his past self goes to the future. And then Tony Stark gets to reconcile with his father, and Captain America gets to finally get his dance with Peggy Carter and be in love, and that's great. I love all that stuff. And Tony Stark has a family, but then he dies, and ultimate sacrifice, which is, what he wanted to do all along. The scenes between Tony Stark and Pepper Potts, who's played by Gwyneth Paltrow in here, all those scenes are great. Like the scene where, she's on the sofa, and then Tony's talking about, the quantum realm, and then she says to him, he's like, Tony Stark's like, yeah, I can put a pin in it and drop it right now and go to bed. But then she's like, but will you rest? Will you be satisfied with that? And she knows him, and we know that Tony Stark is the way he is. So we had lots of beautiful moments in here, but then the whole time heist thing, I really didn't have a whole lot of interest for. It was fun, but I kind of didn't care. Then we have the end fight, which is the same thing as every other Avenger movie, but then the sweet factor was that all of the vanished characters come back, and they have the fight, and all this great stuff. It's great. And everything is tied up. They tie up the loose ends. It's a perfect conclusion to this franchise. But then they do give us some hints about what would happen in the future of the MCU, because then there's no Vision in here. I think he's officially dead. Black Widow's officially dead because she sacrificed herself for the Soul Stone. Loki is kind of dead, but his past self escaped, so who knows what's going to happen with that. Then Gamora is the most interesting thing, because Gamora she got sacrificed for the Soul Stone, so her future self is dead, but her past self is still alive, and her past self doesn't accept Star-Lord. And so at the end of Endgame, we see this moment that may be a hint as to what's going to happen in Guardians Volume 3, where it seems that Thor is a part of the team now, which would be very interesting, because we see this new version of Thor where he looks, like the big Lebowski, in the words of Tony Stark. And, he's got a big belly, drinks beer, so he fits right in with the Guardians. So it'd be interesting to see how Thor plays into being a part of the team in Guardians Volume 3, because it seems like that's the direction they're going in, and it'll be interesting to see how James Gunn handles that. But it seems like maybe the main story, or at least finding something to do with Gamora, because we see a moment where Star-Lord is looking at a picture of Gamora, and there's some words on the screen. I couldn't quite make it out because they were backwards, and I'm dumb. I can't read backwards. But he's looking at the screen, then Thor interrupts him, then he immediately goes off the screen, but then Thor's playing around, and then we see some red dots with some red lines. I don't know what that means, but it seems like it's a hint of what the plot is going to be in Volume 3. which is interesting, but I do think they should keep Gamora dead. But it's going to have something to do with her and Star Lord because he's obsessed with her and that was the love of his life. So all that little stuff was great, but as a whole, it's satisfying. Yes, it's a satisfying conclusion because they tie up all the loose ends. We get hints to what's going to happen next. I feel like each character, the OG characters, have a good conclusion. Especially Tony Stark and Cap America. Tony Stark has a ceremonial death. Like he said in Civil War, he's never gonna stop. You know, and in Cap America, he's always wanted to be in love, and he finally gets that. So we got these nice moments in here, and they get their highlight reel showcasing the 11 years, which is great. So it's a good movie. It's a good movie, but for me, my money, I prefer Infinity War because it was unpredictable, had lots of good character interactions, character moments, and the movie flowed so perfectly. It's Infinity War. I love that movie. But Endgame is a nice conclusion and a good wrap up. It's a good movie, but I prefer Infinity War. And that's all I have to say. So, as always, thank you for watching, and I will talk to you next time. The movie I would have made, I would have started the way things started off in Endgame, but then instead of the team going to Thanos, ambushing him, and cutting off his head, which was a good moment, what I would have done in my version, I would have had Thanos use the Reality Stone like he did in Infinity War, where the team thinks they killed him, but then he returns and says, I tricked you. And then the team tries to kill him again, but then it's revealed that Hela is working with Thanos. She's still alive and she comes back. And during this process, as they're fighting and Hela reappears and Thor is freaked out about it, there'll be some sort of exposition where Hela and Thanos explain why they're working together and how she came back and what her goal is. And I would say that since Thanos at the end of Infinity War is in a weakened state, he wants to keep the stones and they're not really working at their full potential and he's too weak to really fight the Avengers. And Hela wants to take over different dimensions and different universes, and so somehow she comes to Earth and seeks out Thanos because she heard about him and she knows he has the gauntlet and she wants to work with the most powerful person. And then Thanos knows that Hela has some sort of abilities that can keep him alive, during his weakened state, so they're helping each other. And this is revealed and the team gets their ass whooped and Thor is nearly killed, so they retreat and they run away, and Thanos and Hela escape. And instead of this time travel nonsense, there should just be more down to earth moments in the movie, like at the beginning of Endgame, where we just see the team and they're just living their lives and dealing with their situation. And how they're doing that is that they're all in hiding. They're all in hiding. And I would have Thanos and Hela take over the world. They're basically dictators. They're taking over the world, how like Bane took over Gotham. And they're taking it by force. And Thanos, he's God and he's got Hela by his side and they're taking over. And the Avengers, they don't know what to do. So they're in hiding for a little while and they're trying to figure out what they can do. And, there's just complete chaos everywhere. It's just complete chaos. The team come up with a plan to work together to take the gauntlet away from Thanos because it's not working at its full capacity. So he can't do the snap again. Because it's like it works sometimes and then it doesn't, and he can only use certain stones, but then he can't get the glove off. So there's these complications. So then, by the end, the team faces him after they come up with their plan. And somewhere within the story, we can reveal that Hela was just using Thanos to get the gauntlet for herself. And she's trying to execute this plan of like, okay, yeah, I know the gauntlet doesn't work. I have to get it off of him. But right now, I'm just going to pretend that I'm on his side just to get him to trust me. And then you could say throughout the movie, Thanos and Hela are creating their new gauntlet, and the Avengers are trying to get a hold of that before they complete creating a new gauntlet. And Hela reveals at the end she's going to take it for herself, and then Thanos and Hela go back and forth once Thanos knows that Hela's trying to betray him, and then the Avengers take advantage of that and defeat Hela, and then they defeat Thanos as a team, and Iron Man, he can still do the snap, but then instead of Steve Rogers, going back in time and being with Peggy Carter and getting old, I think Captain America should die at the hands of Thanos, where Captain America in Endgame, Thanos breaks his shield and then he stands up and he has a broken arm. And then he says, I can do this all day. And then Thanos takes his blade and just impales Captain America and holds him up for everybody to see and then throws him on the ground. And then that's a sacrificial death. And then Iron Man can still do like I am Iron Man and snap everything and bring peace back to the universe. But then instead of Captain America being old, he gets killed in battle, and then we can have some dreamlike sequence at the end where Captain America is in heaven or some sort of heaven-like location, and he's there and he's kind of sad, but then he sees Peggy in heaven as well, and then they finally have their dance. They're both dead, which is sad, but then they finally get to meet in heaven. And that's how I would have made Endgame.